Chapter 7 Desert Capture. "Come in, Harold," called George Hibbert, as Harold knocked to the half-open door. "I was just hoping that you'd come over this morning. I want you to meet Margaret Ann Williamson, and then you can listen to the story that I've promised to tell her. Margaret Ann's mother lived here in Burns when she was a little girl. She used to spend a great deal of time right here in our yard, playing with my brothers and sisters. Now, Margaret Ann is Sally Donegan. She's been begging me for an animal story. So now that you're here, I'll have an audience of two listeners." Harold smiled at the little blue-eyed girl who sat so primly in the leather chair by the librarian's bed, and she smiled shyly in return. "What's the story today, Mr. Hibbert?" the boy questioned eagerly. "I do hope it's about the nest of gold that you mentioned last time. I've been looking forward to hearing that one ever since then. It sounds quite mysterious. No, we'll wait until next time for the story of the nest. Margaret Ann's especially interested in horses, so I'm going to tell her about an animal that can outrun the swiftest horse. In fact, it can outdistance most land animals, even when painfully wounded. It has been known to travel 60 miles an hour. Then it must be a coyote," broke in Margaret Ann, her eyes glistening with excitement. "We saw one out on the desert between here and Bend." "No, it isn't a coyote," answered George, shaking his head. "This animal is the American pronghorn antelope, which is found only in North America. Before I tell you the story, which I first heard from my father, I'll tell you young people a little about the antelope. Many years ago, there were millions of antelope in the West, where they, like the buffalo, provided food for the Indians. Then, as the white men began to hunt with guns, these huge herds were almost wiped out. In addition, many of those surviving fell prey to a cattle disease called Fossy Jaw. Finally, about 1900, only a few of those interesting animals remained, and they were found only in the most isolated places of the country. About 1910, various wildlife enthusiasts laid plans to preserve this game animal. In 1924, there were less than 26,000 of them left in the United States. But since then, refuges have been established by the government in Nevada, Wyoming, and Oregon, and in 1937 the number had increased to 130,000. "Did you say that there was an antelope refuge in Oregon?" inquired Harold. "I've never heard that before. Where is it, or do you know?" "Indeed I do," smiled George. "Heart Mountain Antelope Refuge is located in nearby Lake County, in the midst of strange mountains formed by dark volcanic rock. There, the protected animals have increased from only 200 to many thousands. Perhaps some day you can go there, for it is a very interesting place. But I must hurry on with my story. It is in May or early June that the female gives birth to two or three fawns. The mother cunningly hides them for the first 2 days, but by the end of that short time the fawns are swift runners, and within a month they are able to equal the distance, the speed of their parents. In fact, it is this speed which often saves the animals from death. Although, if necessary, a mother will turn and fight with her sharp hooves to defend her fawns. Some years ago, my father started for the mountains for the express purpose of trying to find and capture a young antelope. As a member of the Game Commission, he felt it necessary to know as much about wildlife as possible, since it is almost impossible to get near the antelope in his natural surroundings. It was Dad's intention to bring a young animal here, where it could live in safety in the enclosed pasture adjoining our place, and from which location he could easily study and observe its actions. When Dad reached a small rimrock enclosed valley, he tied his horse behind a tree and then cautiously crept up on a large rock where he lay flat, looking out through his field glasses. Oh, what did he see? Breathed Margaret Ann, holding her hands tightly together. What do you think he saw, Harold? Smiled George, looking from one interested young face to the other. An antelope? Replied Harold. Yes, he saw an old mother antelope running nervously about whenever any moving thing came into the valley, which she considered her special property. Even swooping eagles and preying hawks were driven away as she charged at them. In addition to this, Dad saw the flaring white rosette formed by the white hairs on the animal's rump. These hairs were raised whenever the animal is alarmed, and they show up plainly enough, though its tanned coat cannot be seen among the sagebrush and rocks. Dad knew then that the fawns must be somewhere in that little valley. He knew also that if he could only wait patiently, he might be lucky enough to see them, for the antelope mother nurses her young ones every 2 hours. She will feed near them, and then, when it is time for them to nurse, she will go toward their hiding place and give them some kind of signal. What does she do, Mr. Hibbard? Broke in Harold, quite forgetting his accustomed politeness in his interest in the story. Does she call out? No one has ever been able to learn what signal is given, replied George. But the young ones come out at once from their hiding place, nurse for about 5 minutes, and walk about at the mother's heels for exercise. Then the mother antelope, without turning her head or making an audible sound, gives the same mysterious signal. The fawns turn at right angles and go off about 50 or 75 steps into the sagebrush, where they hide themselves so well that if you were to pass within several feet of them, you probably would not see them. Did your father get to see the little babies? Burst forth Margaret Ann, eager to know the answer right away. Dad said that he lay on the hard rock for 12 long hours, from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night. But not once did he see that mother nurse her little ones. He didn't know whether she sensed his presence there or what had happened, but he was sure there was some unusual reason for her apparent neglect. And then late in the afternoon, just when Dad was about ready to give up and start for home, he saw the mother swerve near a juniper tree. Just as she reached it, a large bobcat jumped down from the branches and ran full speed for the safety of the rimrock some distance away. Dad was astonished to see the mother antelope leap in pursuit of the fleeing bobcat. Because of her great speed, she soon caught up with the killer. With one bound, she struck him with her shoulder, sending the bobcat sprawling into the nearby brush. Hurriedly, he struggled to his feet and again started running for safety. Again, she struck him with her shoulder, and again he sprawled flat upon the ground. This happened several times, but at last the frightened bobcat reached the rim rock and disappeared from sight. I imagine that had he not jumped hastily to his feet each time, she would have trampled him to death beneath her sharp hoofs. And did your father get to see the baby fawns? Asked Margaret Ann, cheeks red with excitement. Oh, I hope he did. Yes, nodded George. He really saw the babies, for after the treat cat, Bobcat, left the little valley, the mother became less and less nervous. Finally, her fluff went down, and soon she gave the signal for the little ones to come out of hiding and nurse. How hungry those poor babies must have been all day. But not once had they dared to show their little noses without hearing their mother's command to come out from hiding. Dad carefully marked the spot where they went into hiding, and after the mother had wandered some distance away, he ran down the slope into the valley, cornered one of the fawns, and brought it home, where it became a family pet. "Oh, it seems cruel to take away her fawn," exclaimed Harold, "especially when she was so brave and worked so hard to save the little fellows from the bobcat." "It might seem that way," agreed George, "unless you remember why Dad wanted to capture a small antelope. The mother still had her other babies, and Dad had the young animal, which he could observe and study. Fluffy never lacked for care and attention, you may be sure. You would have laughed if you could have seen him with his foster mother, Nanny, one of our best milk goats. They became very good friends, although when Fluffy was only 4 months old, he was as large as Nanny. Fluffy had the run of the place, and would even frolic along nearby streets, much to the delight of all the neighbor children. But when mealtime rolled around, he was right back here with Nanny, and whenever Dad came home, the little fellow followed him about just like a puppy. Why, he used to come right in here to see me, and I wish you could have seen the expression on his antelope face when he first walked across the slick linoleum. He looked so comical, just as though he'd like to say, my, what a strange feeling dirt you have in here. I can barely stand up." And that ends the true story of Fluffy, an American pronghorn antelope who lived right here in the Hibbard yard, smiled George. "Oh, I just loved that story," sighed Margaret Ann. "I wish you'd tell us another one, won't you please?" "Yes, that surely was interesting, Mr. Hibbert," agreed Harold. "Now I've learned something else which I can pass along to my nature class at school. Thanks very much." "You're both welcome," said George pleasantly. "But I think I'll have to beg off for today. Friend is coming by to take me for a ride, and I must get ready. But if you will come over again soon, I'll be glad to visit with you. Goodbye, and thank you again," Margaret Ann and Harold said as they went out the door. Harold called back, "And I'll be waiting to hear about the nest of gold."